Right, it's almost 2 minutes after 10. I think we're going to kick it off. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining today's Tower Herbicide webinar hosted by BASF. My name is Jan Kutzer, and I am the Turf Marketing Manager here at BASF. We're excited to have you here today as we explore ways the Tower Herbicide can be an effective part of your weed management strategy. Today's agenda will focus on 3 key points. The first is we'll discuss the recent regulatory restrictions on the active ingredient oxadiazone, which is also used in products like Ronstar. We will show how Tower can serve as an alternative in some instances to replace Ronstar. We will also cover how Tower can be used alongside Ronstar to complement each other in certain scenarios. And then lastly, we will explore how Tower can be used independently in various other situations to address different weed management needs. Just a quick note on housekeeping. This webinar will be recorded, so if somebody needs it afterwards, please reach out to us. All attendees will remain muted throughout this presentation to minimize distractions. If you have any questions during the session, please feel free to type them into the chat section, and we will be sure to address them at the end of the presentation. Also, if you do submit a question and we are unable to address it here today, we will be sure to reach out to you afterwards to make sure that we have all your questions answered. So now it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Emma Lukawa. She is the technical specialist for the Southern US with BASF. Dr. Lukawa has extensive experience in weed management strategies, and she will guide us through the best practices for using Tower Herbicide. And with that, I'll hand it over to Dr. Lukawa. Emma, the floor is yours.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone for being here. So like Jan mentioned, we want to give you the tools to be successful with Tower Herbicide. So whether or not you're affected by the recent Ronstar restrictions, we want you to walk away from this webinar with a better understanding of how you can incorporate Tower Herbicide into your existing programs. So we're going to cover the basics of what you need to know to be successful with Tower, and then how to use it at key times throughout the season to really maximize weed control. So what is Tower Herbicide? Tower delivers selective pre-emergent control of annual grasses, sedges, and small-seeded broadleaf weeds in golf course turf, lawns, and ornamentals. So here are some of the key features. Tower controls some of the more challenging weeds that we have to deal with, particularly on golf courses. And those are goosegrass, doveweed, sedges, spurge, and then even Poa annua. It provides seasonal adaptive utility with a flexible rate range. So we can actually use it on warm season turf grass, but also cool season turf grass in the spring, summer, or even fall. So if we use it at the end of the summer, it also has much shorter reseeding intervals. So you can use Tower closer to your overseeding window to kind of extend that residual protection and really bridge the gap between your spring and then your late fall applications for weed control. Tower has incredible versatility. It's a liquid formulation. It readily mixes with other pre-emergent herbicides to expand the spectrum of weed control. And then it can also be mixed with post-emergent herbicides to really extend that residual length of control as well. And so we'll cover some of the more common tank mix partners later in the presentation. And then most importantly for the topic of this webinar, Tower Herbicide delivers residual control and early post-emergent activity on Poa annua. So we can use Tower to enhance our Poa defense strategy. Plus, being that it's a group 15 herbicide, it's been largely underutilized for Poa control. So we don't have the same resistance issues in Tower or other group 15s in managed turfgrass sites. So Tower Herbicide inhibits the shoot as they germinate and emerge, but it doesn't cause any of the nasty root pruning effects like some of the DNAs or even spectacle does. So you can safely use tower in sandy soils without the risk of root injury, and it's also a great rotation option to break up the heavy use of those root pruning herbicides. So if you're a heavy spectacle user or a DNA user and you regularly have significant issues with things like drought or winter kill, you may want to take a look at your roots and then use tower to give them a little bit of a break in your season-long herbicide programs. Tower is a non-staining liquid formulation. It readily mixes with other herbicides. It does have a strong smell, but it isn't going to dye everything yellow, which is nice. We can use it on green turf that's actively growing in the spring, summer, or fall. And the other nice thing about Tower is that it doesn't have to be watered in immediately like Ronstar does, and we can get reliable activation with a fairly small amount of irrigation or rainfall as long as that irrigation goes out within 7 to 10 days. So we tend to recommend light irrigation immediately following that, really just to get the product off the foliage and then also to activate the barrier. Because we have high water solubility, we don't need a ton of water to get that effective barrier. So it really gives us an advantage as a pre-emerge to get a nice residual barrier on the ground. So the active ingredient in Tower herbicide is dimethenamide P. It's a group 15 herbicide. The formulation here is an EC formulation. But some of the great things about Tower is, like I said, it's absorbed by the shoots and the protective sheaths of grassy weeds. So the new growth is deformed and the weeds die as they emerge. Tower herbicide is non-burning, so it's safe to apply to green, actively growing turf grass, and it's not absorbed by grass roots, and it doesn't inhibit the roots or cause those root pruning effects like I already mentioned. Tower is also safe to apply over the top of over 100 ornamental plant species, so it makes a great application in lawns or landscape beds, and you have less worry about some of those off-target concerns from any overspray. So use sites, you can see a range of turf use sites on the label, from golf courses, sod farms, athletic fields, and then into the lawns. So really you can use Tower where you need it the most, and you have plenty of flexibility in your use sites to use it across the board. So regardless of what kind of turf manager you are, Tower is a great option for you. The best thing about Tower is that we have flexible utility across turf types. So here are some of the best use recommendations to really set your Tower applications up for success. First, we want to apply to dense and well-established turf grass. We want to make applications spring through fall when our soil temperatures are above 55 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's very important that we do adhere to that early spring temperature recommendation, because if you go out if you go out with Tower as your turf is coming out of dormancy, we can get a little bit of injury. So we always tend to reserve those Tower applications for a little bit later in the spring once your soil temps are consistently above 55. And so that's kind of the real only major watch out with Towers. We kind of want to stick to that temperature. So whether it's the spring or even as we talk about fall applications, we're still trying to time those applications so that our soil temps are above 55 degrees. So just keep that in mind as we go throughout the rest of the talk today. You have a flexible rate range. So on the label, we have 21 to 32 fluid ounces. So if you're on cool season turf types, including bentgrass, Kentucky bluegrass, fine fescue, perennial rye, or even tall fescue, you're going to want to be at the 21 fluid ounce rate. If you are on warm season turf grass, we have the flexibility to use the higher rate, the 32 fluid ounce rate. So whether that's Bahia grass, Bermuda, centipede, kikuya, St. Augustine, seashore paspalum, zoysia, pretty much most of your warm season turf grasses we can use the 21 to 32 fluid ounce rate. And depending on what weed we're targeting and the residual expectations that you want will help guide us as to whether or not we use the 21 or the 32 on warm season turf. We do recommend you do just a light irrigation to rinse that herbicide off the turf foliage and really activate the herbicide barrier. So you don't need to put a ton of water out, but we do like to get it off the foliage, especially when we're going out in our fall applications. That'll help reduce any off-color effects we may see in those slightly cooler temperatures. So just light irrigation, get it off the leaves. And then you can make sequential applications. So if you are going out on cool season turf grass, we like those sequentials to kind of be in that 5 to 8 week window. If we're going out on warm season turf grass, we have a little bit more flexibility. Some people, if they're using the 21 fluid ounces, they really like to tighten their intervals to 4 to 6 weeks, and that can be really effective to kind of keep a tight interval throughout the summer. But you have a flexibility, again, depending on the rate that you choose. So here are just some specific instructions, slight watch outs so that, again, we set you up for success with tower herbicide. So like any herbicide, really, we want to make sure we are applying this to actively growing turf, healthy turf grass. We don't want to be making a lot of applications if our turf is overly stressed and injured. Do not apply tower within 2 weeks following mechanical disturbance. So if you're aerifying, verticutting, things like that, we want to make sure we give it a little bit of time for that turf to recover before we come back with a tower application. We do recommend you delay your overseeding with cool season species for at least 6 weeks. So that is what the label states, a 6-week interval there following your last tower application. That being said, I do know people sometimes go a little bit early, but a conservative thing is to follow the label with a 6-week restriction. It can cause some injury on desirable winter overseed species, and it can actually aid in the removal of your overseed species in the spring. So keep that in mind. Sometimes we may or may not see any injury to the overseed, and sometimes we can go a little bit off color. So we always just want to, remind people of that if you are going out on some of those cool season species. And then if you're going out on fairways where you have mixes of bent and POA, it can cause severe injury to POA. Obviously, we're going to talk about tower as a POA control option. So keep that in mind. So if you've got a mixed stand and you go out with tower, you are going to have some gaps where it takes out the POA and leaves the bent behind. So, that can look pretty rough if your stands sway one way. So just keep that in mind. So some of the key weeds that separate tower from products like Ronstar or even Pennant are its high level of doveweed, goosegrass, sedge, and Poa annua control. So really, tower can match goosegrass control when it's time for the region, and it offers another mode of action to Ronstar. It also gives a little bit, or actually much better activity when it comes to POA control. Tower delivers residual pre-emergent activity, but also has a pretty strong early post activity on some of the key weeds, so especially doveweed and POA. So we can actually get a little bit of kickback, early post activity on plants that have already emerged and germinated. And so that is why we oftentimes will talk about spiking your post-emerge apps with tower, because it brings in an added residual and gives you more complete control of those weed species. So here is where tower apps fit into a season-long scenario. So we, like I said, we want to keep it out of your late winter / early spring application timings. And so that first block there in gray, that is not where we want to use tower. The soil temperatures here are really just too low. We can sometimes see a delay in green up or even a little bit of injury as that turf transitions out of dormancy. And so these are places where you would put pendulum aqua cap or just keep your early Ronstar applications. Once we are actively growing and our soil temps are above 55, again, that is where we bring in our tower application. And it works best as sequentials. And so that is pretty much always how we recommend it, as sequential applications. So the soil residual with tower is shorter than some of the other pre-emergent herbicides. So it doesn't always last as long, but that also gives us more flexibility because we can use it throughout the summer, even if we plan to overseed in the fall. So you can use that 21 fluid ounces. We recommend 3 sequentials if you use the 21 fluid ounces, and your applications can be made 4 to 5 weeks apart. When you use the 32, we make those sequentials 5 to 8 weeks apart. Down south, where it's really hot and wet, those apps aren't going to hold up as long as they do up north or out, out west. So recognize that the residual is shorter than, say, pendimethalin or spectacle. And so that is also why we tend to recommend tank mixes of tower with pendulum aquacap, because we can extend that level or length of residual control with that tank mix. So whether you use, whenever you use a post emerge, you can use tower to increase the residual. So if you're targeting goosegrass, your post emerge is going to be Pilex. If you're targeting crabgrass or spurge, your post emerge is going to be Drive Accelerate. And then if you're going after sedges, you can use a sedge product like Bassagran or Sedge Hammer or whatever you want. And so again, put tower in the tank with those applications because you want to get the pre and post for more complete control. And then finally, when we use tower in fall POA programs, that is the bulk of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to go in depth on that today, but we have a lot of options for using tower and even freeham in those fall POA programs as well. And so this is why we say tower has great adaptive utility, because you can position it pretty much wherever you need it the most, wherever your weed pressure is highest, and you want that added benefit of tower on some of those key weeds. So let's get into our POA defense strategies. That's where we're going to spend the most of the time today. So we all know POA has become an absolute beast, and resistant issues have really forced us all to rethink our approach to managing POA. So why is Poa annua so difficult to control? So unlike other annual grassy weeds, Poa germinates across a wide range of environmental conditions. And so this makes timing our pre-emergent herbicides difficult. Add that to the fact that Poa doesn't always act like an annual plant. Some of the most difficult situations actually involve perennial plants that survive the summer heat, and then they are on full display by the time our fall pre-emergent applications roll around. So that app, when we go out with that pre-app, it doesn't even touch those plants. There is also limited options in terms of post-emergent herbicides that can go out on green turf. And those options are limited even more by the fact that it is harder to take out big mature POA plants at the end of the season. So heavy hitters like Roundup and Finale are obviously non-selective, so they cause significant injury to green turf. So we really are left with dormant cleanup apps, or then spot spraying if your pre-emergent program fails. Resistance is real. We have to plan for it when we make our herbicide selections. And so this can really mean adding more products to the tank and then shifting those programs from season to season. So you can't necessarily use the same POA program year after year. You need to switch up your actives a little bit. And I'll say more about that here in a second. And then finally, some of the changes that we've done in cultural practices over the years can also have major impacts on POA competition and then ultimately success of your control options. So whether that's phrase mowing or overseeding, the agronomic practices really change the approach to management and our reliance on chemical control as a means of controlling POA. POA is hard because emergence is a moving target, and nailing down the ideal timing is really difficult. So to compensate for that, we're going to focus on programs that combine pre plus post activity. And so the thing to remember though is that if you apply these programs too early, you lose that early post advantage and you end up with just a pre-emergent application. And that application is going to run out of steam before the end of the season. If you go too late, the POA may be too mature to really see the benefit of an early post activity, and then you can end up with some spotty control, some inconsistent control. And so we kind of have to pay attention to nail down that timing. Obviously, depending where you are in the country, your timings and your trigger points are going to vary. So with POA, we see that extended emergence window, and then we also see a slight variation from year to year depending on the weather patterns. So sometimes we go a little early, sometimes we go a little late. And so here's just examples. These photos were taken in September in Atlanta. And then you can see differences here. Here was an October picture in Tennessee. And so, these are all things to consider that you have to be scouting and you have to be looking for the plants and you have to be paying attention to your soil temps and your weather patterns. Another thing to consider is that maybe have we started selecting for POA populations that do germinate later? And that's why some of our pre-programs aren't as effective as they used to be. That, and the fact that we have resistance to multiple herbicides out there. But historically, we have had this over reliance on pre-emergent herbicides that we put out at the end of summer. And as those residuals start tapping out and run out of steam, there's definitely this gap in control where we see late escapes. And so, there's a question to consider is like, have we maybe selected for populations that naturally germinated later? And really, I have no idea about that. But Todd Ronsky has some thoughts. And it's definitely an interesting consideration and maybe something we should think about when we talk about our programs and really thinking about a more complete approach to POA where you have multiple applications that are also including pre and post in the same tank at the same time. So Jim Brosnan's group at the University of Tennessee has really done a lot of work trying to build a predictive model for POA emergence. And, I know these are old plots from, 2019, 2020, but they show the differences in timing of POA emergence and how it can vary from year to year. And when we talk about when we should trigger those applications, you want to try and make the apps when the POA is most rapidly changing. So when that POA emergence is most rapidly changing. So what does that mean? It means you think about it. So suddenly you start out, you have a few POA plants emerging, and then suddenly you have a whole bunch of plants emerging. And so his team took all this data and they pulled in climate parameters to determine what environmental conditions correlated with that rapidly changing POA emergence. And then figuring out how we can use that information to trigger that application so that app is actually going to work for your specific location. And so I'll tell you that the timing for Kentucky is not the same as it is for Tennessee, and it's definitely not the same as it is down in South Florida. And so we have to pay attention to that. This is kind of just a simplified way of finding your trigger point. And so your target timing is when your soil temperatures at a 2-inch depth are 66 degrees or cooler for a 7-day window, plus you have some moisture in the soil. So whether that moisture came from rainfall or irrigation, you've got to have some moisture present. So if you're dealing with a drought situation, it's going to affect your POA germination. And so you have to take that into account if you're thinking about, should I go this week or should I delay a week? Should I go a little bit early? Should I go a little bit later? And so keep that in mind with our POA timings. The days of one-shot POA control programs really are over. And there are several reasons why those programs aren't as effective as they used to be, and widespread resistance is largely to blame. So these numbers are definitely scary. You can see of the POA population, 64% had some level or some degree of resistance to glyphosate. 58% had resistance to prodiamine. And then what's even worse is that some of these plants exhibited resistance to multiple herbicides. And so that is a problem when it comes to the tools that we have available. And add this to the things that we talked about earlier, like the inability to predict your emergence, along with the potential for there to be perennial plants that survive the summer. It really does make timing those applications very difficult. Plus, we have erratic weather patterns, and that compromises our residual control. So the more rain you get, the warmer your winters are, your herbicides are not going to last as long, and we are not going to get as consistent and good control of POA. So we can survive indaziflam plus 6 other modes of action. We've got a mess. You know, POA control has become a bit of a mess on some courses. We are severely limited with what we can use, and it becomes overwhelming when we think about control. And we kind of get a little scared of like, what are we going to do? What can I use? Because we all know POA affects playability. It affects rollability of the ball. It has aesthetic issues, obviously. If you're on athletic fields, it makes an uneven surface. So we end up with more people tripping and falling while they're trying to play sports. And so it's a big deal. And when you've got situations where you can't control it, it becomes a problem. So we get a little bit desperate for solutions. And then we've got, resistance to pre-emerge herbicides. We've got resistance to post-emerge. We have resistance in the non-selectives. So we are kind of running out of options here. So to bring all this together, we designed a program called the Pre Post Poa Defense program to really help guide the herbicide selection process. So we have 2 sheets that are available. Each sheet is front and back, so 1 page front and back. And really, it's a general sheet we have 2 sheets for, one is a general sheet for just control and warm season turfgrass. And then we have another option that is really focused on dormant Bermuda grass. And really, the 2 sheets are pretty much the same, aside from the photos. And then on the dormant sheet, we go into a section, we have a little bit about using Finale XL on dormant Bermuda as a cleanup option. And so that's really the only difference in the 2 sheets. So for most people, the granular and the build your own applications are going to be the same. So the program uses tower, pendulum aquacap, or freehand to combine herbicides with both pre and post-emergent activity. We have liquid or granular options that are designed to fit your site, but then also your preferences. So your budget and what you like in terms of making applications. We have a build your own liquid tank mix. And so that's really going to improve control, but it also adds increased flexibility in our application timing because again, it combines that pre with the post. And then this program combines multiple sites of action to help expand the spectrum of control and also the longevity of control on locations that have heavy weed pressure and also locations that have known resistance in POA annua populations, so known resistance in certain herbicides. So we split the program with granular or liquid options. So the granular option is freehand. And so the freehand is a great option for your, green surrounds, your tee boxes, some of those sloped areas around your bunkers. And remember that freehand combines the active ingredients in tower plus pendulum. So it's dimethenamide and pendimethalin. So for the granular option, we recommend 2 split applications of the 150-pound freehand rate. And the reason why we recommend the split applications is because you get a little bit more flexibility in timing those applications. So I went into detail about how timing those apps can be a little bit tricky. You've got to pay attention to your soil temps, your water, your soil moisture, all of those factors. It gets a little difficult. So if you do the split applications, you get a little bit more leeway with when you make that application. Ideally, we are trying to trigger that 7-day average of 66 degrees Fahrenheit plus moisture in the soil. And so for most of us, that timing tends to be sometime in October. It can be a little bit earlier the further north you are, and a little bit later the further south you are. But that's kind of the ideal timing. And so we say to make 2 applications by December 1st. And so if you use December 1st as kind of your drop dead date, and then you backtrack that, that kind of will help you time your initial application. And so you can make your splits anywhere from a 6 to 8 week interval. I think most people tend to go on the shorter interval for the splits just so they ensure good coverage throughout that whole window. So that tends to be the preference. But so again, 2 applications, 150-pound rate, excellent control of Poa annua for the entire season. And so here's just an example from Tennessee. These treatments were applied September 28th and November 15th. Excellent control at that 150-pound rate with the split applications. We do have a lot of people who go out with the 200-pound rate, either in splits or as a single 200-pound application, and that can be incredibly successful as well. We get excellent control even with a single application. But again, when you use that single app, you've got to time it right. And so if you don't time it right, it doesn't work as well. So again, great option as well if you want to go out with the 200-pound rate. And remember, your seasonal max does allow you to go 2 applications at the 200-pound rate. So here's just some, photos of where we have used freehand compared to other programs. So in this picture, freehand is that bit on the left, and then a liquid pre-emerge program was used on the right, and you can see the difference in control. Here we go with freehand, again, kind of in those green surrounds. That's a great place to put freehand. Some people like to go out with a drop spreader. Just remember, if you're using a drop spreader, make sure whoever is doing that application has it calibrated, is walking at an appropriate speed, because you can get a little heavy with drop spreaders in those applications, and we don't want to get overlap with that higher rate of freehand. So it's a great option. When you go out with freehand in your surrounds or any of your sloped areas, we do recommend you follow that with a light irrigation, because it just helps to really seed that freehand on the surface, so we don't have to worry about it, moving or anything like that. So just go out with a real light irrigation following that application. But you can see the difference in control where we had freehand there in the left, and then a liquid program that was on the right that was really, kind of failed to control the POA there. Here is just, I love this photo because it really shows what freehand can do. This was a drop spread. They did like a single line or a single band of freehand just to see how well it worked. And that's all POA, guys. So POA on the left, POA on the right, flowering. And so it makes a huge difference, and it's a fantastic option when you want to get those, tighter lines. You can do that with freehand. So the granular formulation is great for surrounds, tees, and even bunker faces. But for fairways, most people want to do a liquid application because it's more cost effective. And so here are the rate equivalents if you were trying to achieve that 200-pound freehand rate with liquid freehand. So tower plus pendulum aquacap. So to get the high rate, you need to be 32 ounces of tower and then 67 ounces of pendulum aquacap. So we have the flexibility there to do liquids at a 200-pound equivalent or a 150-pound equivalent, and you can do splits. So you have a lot of flexibility of how you can do it. Here's just some photos that were submitted by superintendents. And so here's one from Northern Virginia on zoysia grass. They did the tower tank mix at 32 fluid ounces with pendulum aquacap at the 3.1 pint rate. And the quote was, "cleanest my fairways have ever been." So here's another photo of that. I will say that if you want to extend the residual a bit, that's when you can start bumping up your pendulum rate a little bit higher. So you have that flexibility of the 3.1 to the 4.2 pints. So I will point out that we do consistently see a slight increase in control when we use the granular freehand option as opposed to liquid tank mixes. Sometimes that difference in control is negligible and it really isn't overly biologically significant, but we can see a difference. And so that's what you're seeing in this chart here. You can see a slight reduction when we went from the granular to the liquid mix. And a lot of that is because in the liquid, we were using the 3.1 pints. And remember, that's a little bit lower than what is in freehand. So the equivalent in freehand to get that 200-pound rate is the 67 ounces. And so that 3.1 pints is a little bit lower because that's about 60 ounces of pendulum aquacap. Both options are still providing excellent control. So you can see 96 to 91% control 122 days after that initial treatment. And by 162 days, we're still pretty good. Mixes that include, so if you do tower plus pendulum, mixes that include a third, and if you add a post-emergent in the tank, we definitely get more consistent control, and it also increases your timing in that application, your application timing. So you have increased flexibility there. Because when you put a post out, you're going to get the reach back. And so, your timing, we can go a little bit later and still get the same level of control. So consistently, adding a third makes a difference. Tower on its own does really good for POA control. You can see about 96% control with just a single application of tower. But what happens if you just do one application of tower is that your control is going to drop off because that residual is not going to last. And so we can see it drop. You can see by 168 days, we're only about 55% control. Whereas all of the mixes, we're still at 100% control. Now, if you do a sequential tower application about 4 to 6 weeks apart, you can get 100% control with just tower alone. We don't recommend that because of the risk of resistance and all of those other things we talked about earlier. But this is just showing you that tower does a fantastic job controlling POA annua, both pre-emergently and also early post. And so putting it in a tank is going to make a difference, and it gives another mode of action that has not been used very much for POA programs. So you've got a ton of flexibility. It's basically the big message here. So a lot of our zone defense type approaches really are the best insurance. And so that's why you're going to see all these mixes with things like Curb, Katana, Princep. InView's got their Pre-3 program, so you can see that there with Spectacle, Tribute Total, Simazine, and they even throw Roundup in the tank sometimes. And so there's a lot of herbicides that are going out for POA control, and we do need to think about, putting multiple things in the tank to really just give us more consistent activity. And so back to the Pre Post Poa program here, this is your liquid build your own mix. And so this is really what we're going to be using for fairways, tees, and all of your other turf areas, because you have the flexibility with the liquid application. So the program starts with you put tower in the tank. So all these things go in the same tank, and we're going to make one application. So you put tower in the tank, then you pick a residual pre-emergent. So we give you the option to pick pendulum or spectacle flow, depending on your preferences. And then you're going to pick one post-emerge. And so you have a list of options. And the reason why we gave you a list of options or a bunch of choices is because everybody has their favorite post. And then also we're trying to deal with resistance issues. So if you've got, resistance to revolver or monument or whatever it is, you can use one of the other post options instead. And so we're trying to give you that flexibility, but also recognize that, if you're down in Florida, people probably don't want to use Princep, okay? And so they have other options they can use. And then plus you've got budget considerations to think about. These are expensive applications. We recognize that, but it is becoming, we've kind of got ourselves to the point where you have to make applications that include multiple modes of action, because otherwise we're getting really inconsistent control. And so making sure you're picking options to go in that tank that are actually going to get the job done, it's going to make a difference. And so that is why we've selected these herbicides, because consistently these are the ones that perform the best in trials. And so you build your liquid mix, you put it all in the tank, and then you make one application probably somewhere between October 15th and December 1st. Again, we're trying to use that model to better predict the timing of our application, but because we have the post-emerge in the tank, we can go out a little bit later here and still get excellent control. We do like to say, once you start getting into December, those POA plants just get too big and you're not going to get as great of control with some of these posts. And so we like those applications to go out before December 1st. Also, another thing to remember is what I said about tower in the 55-degree soil window. So that counts in the fall too. So if you're somewhere where you get cold faster, then you need to be making this application a little bit earlier, because we still want our soil temps to be above 55 degrees before we make those applications. And so you don't want to wait too late, because then we can set ourselves up for injury issues. So make that application in that window between 66 and 55 degrees soil temps, and you make one application. This is the kind of level of control you can get. It's excellent, fantastic control. And it doesn't matter the mixes. We've done mixes all different ways. Here's just examples that we've done over the years. Tower curb, tower katana spectacle. We've done tower princept. Here it is next to, that pre-3 program. So like I said, you can get excellent control. Tower is a fantastic option to your program, and we recommend everybody put it in the tank for POA control. So like I said, we've got two programs. One is for dormant Bermuda, and so the only difference there is Finale, going out with Finale for a cleanup application. And so you can use Finale 55 to 82 fluid ounces, go out on dormant Bermuda grass to clean up any POA that your pre-emergent programs miss. Reason why we use Finale, because glyphosate resistance is everywhere. And it can cause major problems. So here you can see the difference in glyphosate resistant POA. It just doesn't control it at all, whereas Finale will control glyphosate resistant POA annua. So just a few photos showing that and what it can look like. And it can be quite severe when you're dealing with glyphosate resistance. When we're talking about POA control, I don't want to ignore the agronomic practices that can affect your control. So some of the cultural practices to consider can definitely affect turf safety of some of these applications. So here is a trial that we did on Trinity zoysia. So Matrella type zoysia are always more sensitive to herbicides and other things. And so you've really got to watch out on Matrella species. But basically what we were showing here was that Primo applications actually were responsible for the injury that we were seeing with herbicide applications. And so it actually wasn't the herbicide, it was the Primo and the combination. So you can see we did Primo solo and we got turfgrass injury, whereas we compared that to Trim It where we had no injury. When we put Primo with either Tower or Freehand, we got injury. But if we use Tower or Freehand with Trim It or Tower and Freehand without a PGR, we got no injury. So all of that injury was actually coming from those Primo applications. And so keep that in mind when you're thinking about your agronomic practices in the fall and how that can affect not only your POA control, but also the safety of some of the products that you're putting out. And then another thing to consider, I really love this photo because just like fashion, all trends, whether they were good or cringeworthy, they eventually come back into style. So remember when everybody used to overseed warm season fairways? This is just the power of plant competition. There's no herbicides here. It's just overseeded perennial ryegrass. So whether it's agronomic practices like phrase mowing or considering overseeding again, we still don't have a magic potion for POA, and it's going to take planning. It's going to take vigilance to stay on top of it. And it's going to take a little bit, maybe a risk to try something different. And so we want to try Tower, and we want to think about Tower in combination with all of these other approaches to control POA. So that was the POA bit. I'm going to spend just a couple minutes here talking about all the other places you can use Tower. So spring through fall, we can talk about the other grassy weeds that we love to hate. So here we'll talk about goosegrass. So this is your germination chart and kind of when we are making those applications. So crabgrass germinates when your soil temps are about 55 degrees for 5 days. And so you know your crabgrass is about to germinate because your forsythia starts blooming, right? And then after the crabgrass germinates, that's when your goosegrass comes out about 4 to 5 weeks later. So when we talk about spring herbicide strategies, if you're trying to control crab and goose, it usually takes sequential applications. And so this is kind of where those sequentials play out. So your first stop is going to be pendulum, and then we're going to come back with either pendulum plus tower or tower. And then we can even do another sequential tower application to extend that window. So here you can see pendulum followed by tower, excellent control of crabgrass. Plus, we then add in the fact that tower has really good pre-emergent control of goosegrass. And so this is the difference with using tower and Ronstar. Tower gives you better goosegrass control than Ronstar does. Plus, we can put tower out when that turf is green, and we know if we go out with Ronstar flow on green turf, we get injury. And so this is a great option. You can see even 86 days after that treatment, tower still holding nice and strong, excellent control. Here's what those plots look like. You can see we're still getting greater than 90% control 86 days after that tower application. So add in a sequential tower, and you've got complete season-long control. And so that makes a huge difference when it comes to goosegrass because it is becoming the next POA in terms of difficulty and control. If we're on cool season turfgrass, we can still use tower. Tower is an option. We can use tower in the summer to control goosegrass on cool season turf. This was, a picture from a superintendent on Twitter, showing, excellent goosegrass control on his cool season teas with 21-ounce sequential applications. So excellent control there if you go out in the summer. Again, the timing of that application is going to be based on your temperature and where you are. And it will vary slightly if you have drought conditions. And so a nice option on cool season. Don't forget about it for cool season. This is goosegrass. This is, like I said, this is a problem. This is why we've got to start thinking about these integrated approaches and sequential applications and using tower in some of these programs, because it is a headache and people don't like the polka dot look on their fairways. And so when you've got to go out with a post and you've got a spot treat, it's ugly to go out there and spot treat and have polka dots all over your fairways. And so use pendulum and tower, use tower sequentials, and then add in your post-emerge herbicides in the summer. So if you've got crabgrass, you put tower with drive accelerate. If you've got goosegrass, that's where we use Pilex. And so great option there. Don't focus on one weed and forget about another one. So here's a good example of a before and after using a post-emerge herbicide for goosegrass. So we use Syncor plus Pilex. The goosegrass checked out, fantastic control, but the doveweed checked in. And so this is why we want to add tower to the tank when you make a post-emerge application, because you want to control the other weeds in the background that are germinating that later in the summer are going to be a problem. And so put your tower in the tank to double down on doveweed, right? So doveweed germinates when our soil temps hit 65 to 70. So we get crabgrass, goosegrass, then doveweed. And all those sequential applications that we already talked about provide fantastic control of doveweed as well. So you can go 2 apps of tower, you can do 2 apps of tower plus pendulum aquacap, or you can do tower plus post-emerge. And so you have plenty of flexibility to control doveweed. In recent years, a lot of people have really liked the tight tower intervals for doveweed control. So they're going out with 3 applications, 4 to 5 weeks apart at tower 21 ounces and getting excellent doveweed control. So things to consider. Another thing to consider here is that tower has early post activity on doveweed. So this is a trial where we were using tower at different stages of doveweed. So from the multi-leaf stage all the way up to the more mature lateral spreading stage. And you can see that when we made tower applications on that multi-leaf stage, we were getting 95% control a month after that application. So that's pretty dang good, right? And then if you wait until like the 1-tiller stage or the slightly bigger stuff, we're still getting like 50% control. So again, if you're using sequentials and you're putting tower in the tank with your post-emergent product, you're getting better activity and more complete control. So it'll make a difference. Sedges, another great thing about tower is sedge control. We've got resistance out there all over the place in sedges to a number of different herbicides, and tower and even basagran as a post-emerge provide good options as a tank mix to go out in the summer. So here's just yellow nut sedge control. This was on cool season turfgrass, so a Kentucky bluegrass lawn. So you can see that sequential tower applications providing excellent control. One other place you can think about tower is during renovation, and this really comes into play as we talk about the Ronstar restrictions coming down. So historically, Ronstar was always the herbicide of choice for renovations and grow-ins. It has really nice turf safety. It's a great application, good spectrum of control, and tower has a place in renovations. And so this was some work where we were looking at sequential tower applications at 21 ounces or 32 ounces compared to Ronstar applications, so straight Ronstar, so Ronstar flow followed by Ronstar on fertilizer, and then a program that included Ronstar to start followed by Tower. And what you can see is that the Tower applications, we had coverage faster, better coverage faster. And so that was real interesting. And then add that if you use, lexicon for its plant health benefits to really stimulate that growing a little bit more, you get kind of like a compounded effect there. So Tower definitely has a place. I will say, the choice between Tower and Ronstar and renovations really depends too on your site and what kinds of weeds you're dealing with. If you're dealing with something like Florida pusley, Ronstar is going to be a little bit better than Tower on that particular weed species. So you really have to just, take into consideration your weeds as well. But Tower's got a place in renovation work too. So don't forget about that. And then finally, since we're about out of time, just to kind of round everything out, these are the quick facts about Tower. Sequential apps for summer weed control, increased utility across cool and warm season turf types, easily tank mixes with pre-emergence and other posts. You've got fall applications with your pre plus post Poa Defense programs, short reseeding interval. You've only got to wait 6 weeks. Limited negative effects during renovation or establishment. And so it's a great option. It's an alternative, it's a replacement, and it can be used in conjunction with Ronstar. You've got a lot of flexibility where you could use Tower, when you can use Tower. And we just want everyone to leave this webinar thinking about Tower and ways they can incorporate it or ways you can incorporate it into your herbicide program. So with that, I'll take questions. You can always reach out to me after the webinar, reach out to your sales rep, your BASF rep if you have questions afterwards. We're going to send you the recording and we're going to send the slides out. But yeah, I hope you guys, learn something new about Tower and ways you can use it at your own course or field or wherever you're growing turf.